welcome back to the Decarb Connect podcast, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Rana Ghoneim, who is the Chief of Energy Systems and Infrastructure for the UN's Industrial Development Organization. And we'll be talking about a range of things, including the deep decarbonisation initiative that she's leading, and also the kind of more broad concept of how we can drive green public procurement, which is obviously so central to creating a market for products from the hard to abate sectors in particular. So Rana, I mean, as I've just mentioned, this is all about how do we create a marketplace for these products, and through our work with our own decarbonisation leaders network, through the other wider audiences we interact with, I mean, we hear a lot about the need for this sense of a creation of a green products market so that there is something to work towards. So we'll talk about that. But before we do that, could you kick off with just a little bit of context really for you? You know, what's brought you to this moment in time? How have you come to be involved in this kind of work? And just tell us a little about yourself, and then we'll kick back into the green public procurement piece.
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on this podcast. And there's really a number of reasons for me to be involved in this work. The very first one is more developmental, because industry is an engine for growth in many countries, especially in developing and emerging economies. It's a chance really to help countries develop better, create jobs and all that. On the other side, the second angle of it is more the environmental. There is really a big opportunity to reduce emissions that are coming out from industry, which is one of the largest emitters. Industry is really facing quite a lot of challenges, and among them is actually the crisis that we all see now with the energy crisis, because you know, that's causing actually lots of blackouts. Industries are not able to really produce these goods, and so really there is a really strong sense of urgency. And finally, it's for me like quite a passion to work on both these topics, because I really want to make sure that we do meet our climate goals, we do meet our development goals, because I am a strong believer in both of them.
And what was your background originally? So what is the kind of either academic or other kind of experience that you've brought into this?
So I'm an environmental economist, and thus, you know, looking at this from a more economics angle, the green public procurement, the stimulation of the demand and supply. And I've been working in the UN system for over 20 years now, really working with countries on developing solutions that help bring this nexus of energy, industry, and climate change, really, how to support an inclusive and sustainable industrial development for countries.
Okay, great. That's really, really useful. Good kind of to understand the kind of personal drivers as well as, you know, professionally where you're coming from. So thanks for that. So let's set the scene then. So we're here to talk about green public procurement, but first things first, I guess this starts in a way with this sense of a growing problem, or perhaps another way, a growing potential opportunity, which is all around this massive growth that's projected around buildings and infrastructure. Can you just kind of give a bit of context for that? So what is it that we're kind of seeing ahead of us in the next decade or two? And what are the kind of lurking issues with that?
Indeed, the world is expected to build the equivalent of another New York City every month for the next 40 years.
Crazy statistic, isn't it? That
absolutely insane, right? And that's obviously coming because there's a growth in building roads, bridges, buildings, and other infrastructure projects. So obviously for that to happen, you know, lots of these infrastructures require steel and concrete and cement. And so we're really looking into a supply of trillions of tons of those products. Today, actually, the global cement industry accounts for around 7% of the total global CO2 emissions, and steel around 11%. So that's really together, they're quite, you know, what we call among the largest contributors to the CO2 emissions. Around half of the cement and up to 30% of that steel is actually used by government-funded public construction projects. So together, this public procurement of cement and steel for construction projects would account for around 6% of the global CO2 emissions. I guess it's also important to say that, if we put GPP systems in place, it's not just that consumption related to the projects. I mean, government policies is also pushing for some indirect benefit and deeper benefits also related to the productions of this material. And so if we are to account for those indirect benefits as well, we're talking about around 18% of global CO2 emission. So, I mean, at the time when we see the IPCC reports coming out telling us there's really high risks of us not meeting our targets, we're not on track, we really have here a very significant opportunity to make change in sectors that can really make a large impact.
I feel like there's so much data in that you could get hooked on, but the kind of the idea that up to 18% of future global emissions really are just directly associated with public procurement efforts. I mean, that alone shows, one key reason why this is such a trigger, but I guess there's also, kind of a halo effect around public procurement as well, isn't there? That it's the signal, the trigger is not just avoiding those emissions, it's the signal to the wider market that these products are real and have arrived and are usable. Are there other kind of tangible benefits from public procurement going green beyond those ideas?
No, it's primarily as well what you mentioned, really giving this pull signal to the market. So at the moment, I guess, because especially steel and cement are globally traded commodities, they're very competitive. And the challenge they face is really that the technologies that are available today to help decarbonize and bring us closer to the 2030 interim targets are actually quite expensive. So industry needs to really invest significantly in these technologies and to bring them to use. And as these are very capital intensive, time intensive, and so on, there is a premium that those very competitive industries need to put also on the products. And so this is why green public procurement is really, really needed here, because industries that are ending up investing and taking these steps to put a lot of capital into these new projects that are helping lower the emissions, at the end of the day would like to see a certain security in the market demand for them, right? So that's exactly why, green public procurement, I mean, considering the role that and the percentage that we already discussed that the public sector really holds for these sectors, I think that's a very strong signal for the market to actually deliver the products and projects that are needed. So it is very much spot on, Alex. It is that kind of demand signal.
Then let's sort of unpick it a bit. So what are some of the barriers, or what are some of the challenges that you're encountering as you're talking to different nations about this approach?
Yeah, I guess the biggest risk as such, not just a barrier, is a risk that if the government set a target that's too high, then industry cannot deliver against that target. I mean, what do we do? Is that a plausible scenario as well, that at the end of the day there wouldn't be a sufficient supply for this demand that is coming from industry? On the other side, there's also the other risk is for governments to set a target too low that is not enough to stimulate the deep decarbonization, and is just basically ending up with a status quo. So we really need to work on setting a target that is science-based, but also that fosters a close dialogue between governments and industry, because we need to make sure that that target is feasible, ambitious enough. Of course, we need to make sure it's ambitious enough because we are running out of time, but at the end of the day, something that industry really can deliver. I mean, there's tons of other challenges. So I started with that risk because it's really like that was a very important and contentious point in the in discussions as such. But on the other side, if we are setting this green public procurement and we say governments want to buy green steel and green cement, what does that mean? How are we comparing those different products? And of course, there's efforts like colleagues work on steel zero, concrete zero, and others. So there are, I mean, industry is actually showing very much that they are a step forward in setting some of these standards. But at the end, we really need to work on a more globally harmonized standard that's acceptable and that governments kind of can compare against. And then I guess one of the barriers I would also still like to touch upon is more the institutional barrier, because I mean, at the end of the day, government procurement happens across many agencies. You know, there's a time that it takes to actually make that step and change, because even if I look now, not only at governments, if I look at the UN where I'm coming from, I mean, when we tender, when we create tenders, we really go for the most competitive, you know, the acceptable, technically acceptable, yet cheapest offer. So there's really quite a bit of effort to take institutionally to align the policies that we have across governments, public sector, you know, civil society and international organizations, to really make sure that we put in place these, you know, systems that allow us to comply with that target.
Is it the role of your organization, like, do you get directly involved in the setting of standards, or is it more facilitating that conversation? Like, how do you engage around that standards piece?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in the United Nations generally, there's a very strong element on what we call the normative function. So we have a very strong role in standard setting. Of course, that also has to do because we have this convening power to bring many countries around the tables, experts, so independence as well, to ensure that there is no influence, and obviously then work with organizations like the ISO organization, which at the end of the day has the ultimate as well responsibility to bring these standards forward. So it is very much at the heart of what we do, both within UNIDO as an organization, but broadly as well at the UN.
What is the end goal for you here? What is it that you're seeing as the ultimate impact of green procurement that is possible?
Great question. But I think for us to get to that end goal, I think we have a lot of ambitions in terms of the end goals, and we are all aligned. We need to work towards net zero by 2050. But for that to happen, we need to agree on certain shorter term goals and as well as medium term goals. And so what we are working hard to align a number of key governments on is actually to work on the short term, and short term, I mean, that's by 2025, that countries, you know, joining us in this industrial deep decarbonization initiative that you also mentioned in the beginning, are actually willing to make a pledge to announce a commitment to disclose the embodied carbon on projects that they are procuring by 2025. So that is a very first kind of step where we see it already gives us quite a good idea in terms of what's the baseline as well that we are working with, right? And then the second step for that is we need certain things to happen by 2030, otherwise we are at risk of not meeting the 2050 targets. And that is where we are also discussing the possibility to integrate an interim target. So in the beginning, you asked me, so how much, why is it not as easy as 80%? In fact, at the moment, we are discussing something in the range of 30 to 50% by 2030. So that needs to happen by 2030 so that we are giving the market a signal that is needed, but that we also are meeting the climate goals. And then the third level is more, I mean, yes, we are all committed to work towards net zero, but then there is this need for an alignment, alignment of different government policies, including the procurement policy, to align with that target, because maybe that's not the issue in developed countries, but in developing countries, there's really a very strong kind of a need to bring more alignment between industrial policy, energy policy, climate policy, procurement policy. So all of these really need to talk together, because the sustainable development agenda and the climate agenda is very much an integrated agenda that requires us to facilitate this kind of cross-sectoral dialogue and align as well.
So for those making pledges in and around the IDDI, is it necessary for them to have a committed overarching national net zero strategy, or can they come to the table if they haven't chosen that kind of a target?
The purpose we have is, through the working groups we're setting up within the IDDI, is to support countries to come towards that target as well. So, I mean, there is not like a requirement for countries to have that target. I mean, it's very much a learning process. That's where we really believe in this collaboration between countries, the knowledge sharing among countries, because we can shorten the learning. We don't have time. I mean, we want to learn, but we don't have that time. So fostering this network of countries that could share best practices, could really help in taking, accelerated steps towards decarbonization. So as such, there is no requirement for having that, but more, at least the will to work with us through the initiative to really put these things in place.
There are already examples in some jurisdictions of kind of early adopters, if you like, of some green procurement policies. Which do you look at and sort of think, okay, that one's interesting, that one's interesting? Like, what sort of things have you particularly paid attention to that you think are useful maybe to talk about here?
I guess in terms of connected to steel and cement particularly, I would say probably the Buy Clean initiative, which is being implemented in the US, is one which is the most significant. It's been already operating for years, and also if we look already at what they've achieved in the year 2018, so that's already 4 years back if you think about it, they actually have half of the annual CO2 emissions that were associated with cement is related to public construction. So that is around 36 metric tons of CO2. That's how much in the US was actually spent on public procurement, and then 25% is government funded. So Buy Clean is really critical in unlocking this kind of demand for these materials and reducing the emissions that are related to the construction sector, which is really quite impressive.
Okay. So when you look at something like the Buy Clean, what are the things that you're taking from that you think should form part of any kind of green public procurement system as we move forward?
We've done actually in June this year, we've tried to do an analysis of these green public procurement initiatives, and we published a study, How to Guide, in fact, in collaboration with the leadership group for the industry transition, where we tried to break this down into 7 steps, basically. So this is what we're saying. There are 7 steps for you to successfully design and implement a green public policy for the steel and cement sectors.
And we'll include a link to the GGP guide in the full show notes so that listeners can get the picture. But for now, where within those 7 do you see the challenge of this?
That's what we are at the moment struggling with a bit, is more the target setting, because there's a lot of details and science and counter arguments there. So really setting the target. And the second is the scope of this environmental product declarations, is circular economy part of it? Should we look at it? Is it, do we take also the compensation for the carbon emissions as well? Is it part of it? So, these are really some of the nitty-gritty details that we are struggling now to also work on and define for both target setting and the environmental reporting, basically.
So with the IDDI itself then, where are you up to in terms of stakeholders that have stepped in? And yeah, what kind of stage are you at?
There's two elements to the initiative. One is more like the technical, making sure we have all the knowledge we need, we have all the guidelines we need, we have all the tools we need to make sure that we have a thriving market for green steel and green cement. And so there we are, working on building working groups that tackle the challenges related to standards setting, related to the environmental reporting, and related to this sharing of best practices of green public procurement. So these working groups are very much a collaborative effort that brings together government representatives, private sector, civil society, experts to work on guidelines, tools, standards, etc. And then the second element of it, or the second pillar of it, is the political signal. So this is where we're working on a campaign that we would like to launch at COP26, where we have a selected few governments that will be announcing a pledge on green public procurement. And I just have to say, I mean, this is a starting point, I guess, for governments who are among the major producers and users as well of cement and steel, are stepping up at COP26 and making these announcements. But that's the starting point. I mean, we really want to work on growing this, at least to include also the top 10 producers and consumers of these commodities in time for the next COP, and hope to be already reporting some results by then.
We're 10 days out from COP26, and so Rana can't tell us. That's what I'm hearing. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
We're preparing for that, and you'll very soon hear about it. It's been supported very closely by the COP26 presidency and the UK, so that's a sneak peek into it. But basically there's more governments stepping up, and I hope in time for COP we would even have more than 4 governments committing.
What sort of feedback do you get? If there's pushback, where does that pushback tend to come? Or what's the generalized feedback when you open up these sorts of discussions about pledges and plans with different nations?
I have to say it's actually been quite positive so far. So it's not really, it's just that things take time, right? So to get a government to commit, and especially at the moment, there's quite a lot of changes in many countries, which we are targeting. So, change takes time, and adoption of such targets and so on takes time. So I would say this is one of the most critical challenges we are facing at the moment, because we don't have time. There is a sense of urgency. We want to commit, we want to bring countries, but on the other side, many countries have been open to really discuss with us and bring their inputs into the discussion, and I take that as a positive sign. So that's why I'm saying this is the start, and hopefully by COP27 there would be more countries committing. Nevertheless, even those countries that are committing are fully also recognizing that there are, even if we have this signal and a pledge on green public procurement, there are issues that are very essential that we need to work on. And this is, as I mentioned earlier, the target setting, the environmental product declaration principles and reporting principles, and also the standards, those harmonized standards that are also acceptable by governments. So GPP would not work alone if we don't really work in parallel on these issues. But the dialogue has been really promising, both on the public and the private sector side.
And then for COP26 itself, what's the plan for those couple of weeks?
Well, there's quite a lot of events and activities happening around industrial decarbonization. So we're surely trying to put more and more on the agenda, the demand signal and demand creation element, the role of green public procurement. We will, on the 9th of November, have a session where some of the ministers committing to these pledges will be making their announcements at COP26. At the same time, on the 11th of November, we also have a roundtable that brings together also other stakeholders from this agenda and domain. So basically other colleagues working on industrial decarbonization to look at, what else is happening in the landscape, because there is a lot that is happening at the moment, not as much on the government side, which I have to say is probably the unique thing that we are bringing here in IDDI and GPP, is just more this government drive and commitment to match actually the ambition and progress that we have seen from industry so far.
I think I mentioned to you before we started recording the podcast that the audience who's listening in is pretty varied. There are people from industry, there are people from the investment community of all types, there's policy influencers, there's advisors, so it's quite a broad audience. What would you say to them about their role in this?
My call to action is quite simple, because we really can't afford to delay this any further. We need to have those hard conversations. We need to come towards an agreement on some of these issues. And so by not participating in this discussion, you're losing out. So help us bring your perspective. If you're an investor, if you're an industry, if you're an expert in this field, join our working groups, because these are, where we will be taking a lot of these conversations. So join IDDI, join these working groups and help bring your perspectives, because yes, capital is one of the strongest barriers at the moment. This morning, in fact, we were having a consultation with Indian industries, both steel and cement, and everyone was really worried about where this capital is coming from. So we need to work as well on financing principles, which is how do we support also these industries in adopting more affordable financing and developing financing principles that would support that. Industry, the target that is to be communicated next year at the Clean Energy Ministerial, the 13th meeting of the Clean Energy Ministerial. As I said in the beginning, there's a risk that if we make it too high and industries can't comply, or too low and then it's not enough. So industry, please, contribute to this discussion, because we need to know what is feasible as well at your end. And actually, the industry has a very unique knowledge to bring here and to help this initiative flourish further.
I think that's a great call to action. It's basically get involved. And the fact that the IDDI and the campaign around it is not a closed book. This isn't done and dusted. This is still working groups in action, discussions in action, pledges starting to becoming real. The call to action of get involved and help drive this, I think, is a pretty powerful one. So Rana, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck. Good luck as you're sort of pushing forward and gaining those new pledges, and we'll look forward to hearing some of those pledges as they emerge during COP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thanks.
Many thanks for listening to the Decarb Connect podcast. We work with clients across the industrial sectors, specifically those who are tasked with decarbonising the most energy-intensive products and materials that we use every day. If you have an interest in learning more about either our members network, our reports, or our event series, do get in touch with us at decarbconnect.com. Or if you'd like to take part in the podcast, email me, Alex, at ac@decarbconnect.com. Thanks for listening.